In the last winter of the House of Vane, when the creditors had already begun to circle like crows drawn to a carcass, Lord Aldric lay in his bed and watched the candle burn down to nothing. His wife had died in giving birth to the child who now slept in the servants' quarters, wrapped in a blanket that had once hung in the great hall. His lands had been stripped by the king's decree. His name was a curse whispered in the taverns of the capital. He had nothing left, no gold, no allies, no hope, only the keep, and even that was mortgaged to the bone. 6 more months, and the bank would send men to put him out. His daughter would have nothing. Not even the memory of a father's name. The book was older than the keep itself. It had arrived in the post one autumn morning, bound in leather that was not leather, that felt, when you touched it, like something that had once been warm. No return address, no note, just the title, stamped in faded gold. Asterisk the old contracts, asterisk, and inside, on page 47, the ritual. 7 drops of willing blood, drawn from the offerer by his own hand, a stone marked with the old sigil, the one carved into the flagstones of the crypt beneath the keep, where the original Vane had once performed rites that the church would later declare anathema, spoken at the midnight hour. And then, silence. Aldric did not believe. He had been educated at the King's University, had studied natural philosophy and the rational sciences, but he was dying, and he had tried everything else, and so he lit the black candles, the ones that burned without flame, that gave light without warmth, and he descended the spiral stairs with a knife in his hand. What answered was not a spirit in the way the old tales described spirits. It did not appear in the flickering form of a man or a beast. It was wait asterisk, a pressing of darkness against the candlelight, a drinking of the flame. It was vast. It was patient. It had been waiting a very long time. When it spoke, it did not use words, not at first. Aldric simply knew what it offered. He knew it the way one knows the depth of a well by dropping a stone into it and counting the seconds before the sound returns. He knew that it could restore everything. The lands, the gold, the reputation. He knew that his enemies would fall to mishap and misfortune, to ruined contracts, to sudden illness, to the slow grinding of fate against their names. He knew that his daughter would be safe. The price was not gold. The shade did not want gold. Gold was meaningless to something that had been old when the first stones of the keep were laid. The shade told him, in that wordless way, in that pressing of knowing directly into his mind, what it wanted. When his daughter came of age, when she reached her 19th year, she would feel a pull. She would descend to this place, as Aldric had descended. She would kneel on this stone, and she would speak the words. Asterisk I acknowledge the debt of my blood. Asterisk Aldric asked why. The shade showed him. Because she was his blood, because the debt was not a transaction, but a asterisk chain asterisk, passed from parent to child, from blood to blood, until it was spoken aloud and sealed by the one who carried it. Aldric's debt would die with him, but that asterisk chain asterisk, the connection between his bloodline and the shade, that would persist. If she did not speak the words, the shade told him, everything he had just received would be taken back. The gold would turn to lead, the lands would sink into marsh, his enemies would recover, and they would not be kind to the child he left behind. His daughter would be ruined, and the chain would pass to the next of his line, her children, if she lived long enough to have them. Aldric signed in blood, his own freely given, and by morning, everything had changed. The restoration was not gradual, it was immediate. The gold reappeared in the vaults. The creditors' letters arrived, one by one, each one bearing a different seal of forgiveness, debts purchased, contracts burned, liens released. His enemies fell, one by one, in ways that seemed, at the time, like coincidence. A bad harvest, a failed investment, a scandal that had nothing to do with Aldric Vane but which broke them nonetheless. Aldric lived 6 more years. He rebuilt the House of Vane into something greater than it had ever been. He married again, a strategic match, a woman from a powerful family who asked no questions about where the gold had come from. And he raised his daughter, Elara, to be strong, to be clever, to question everything. He never told her about the Pact, but on the night before he died, he pressed a journal into her hands, bound in the same rum leather as the book that had started everything, and he said, asterisk when the time comes you will know what to do. Trust yourself, and do not trust the cold. Asterisk Elara Vane had grown up in the restored keep, raised by servants and tutors, educated in the rational sciences her father had once studied. She knew the history of her family's fall and rise, or what the history books said, a fortunate investment, a stroke of luck, a series of coincidences that had rebuilt her ruined house into a respected name. What she did not know was the cold. It had started when she was a child, a sensation in her chest, a pulling, like the tug of a fishhook stitched into her sternum. It came when she passed near the eastern wing of the keep, where the old stone met the newer construction. It came at night, when the house was quiet, and it felt like something calling her, something waiting. She had learned to ignore it, or she had tried, but on the night of her 19th birthday, when the letter arrived, delivered by a boy on an unremarkable horse, left at the gate without explanation, the cold in her chest flared like a match struck in darkness. The letter contained only 2 words, written in ink that seemed, in the candlelight, to be the color of old blood. Asterisk the vault. Asterisk she descended because she had to know. The journal told her everything. Her father's desperation, his descent, the shade's offer, the price. She read it twice, then a third time. Then she closed the leather cover and sat in the darkness and felt nothing at all, because if she had felt something she would have screamed. And the shade was already watching. It did not threaten her. It did not need to. The debt was written in blood that still stained the stone, her father's blood, 19 years old and dark as rust. If she did not speak the words, the shade would take everything. The keep, the lands, the gold her father had rebuilt. The name of Vane would become a byword for ruin, and the chain would pass to her children and to theirs forever. If she spoke the words, she would become the shade's agent, bound to its will, a puppet with a bloodline as the string. Elara was not a fool. She had read her father's journal, not just the account of the pact, but the margins, the notes, the other names he had researched, the other families who had made similar bargains. Some had refused, their houses had burned, their children had starved, the shades had waited, and the debts had compounded, and eventually there was nothing left. Some had spoken the words, they had become something else, hollowed out, used up, discarded when the shade moved on to the next link in the chain. Their names survived in the histories as cautionary tales, the lord who went mad, the lady who vanished, the heir who was never seen again. But one story was different. A woman named Sarah, who had bargained not with this shade but with another, a different entity, a different contract. She had found a way out, not through defiance, not through acceptance, through memory. The entity had not always been a shade. It had been something else, once, before it was bound, before it was chained to the old contracts. It had forgotten. The binding required forgetting. And Sarah had demanded it remember. She had spoken its true name, not the name the contract gave it, but the name it had carried when it was still capable of being called by a name at all. And in the remembering, the shade had torn itself apart, not destroyed, not killed, but released. The contract dissolved because the thing that held it no longer knew itself. The chain broke because there was no one left to hold the link. Elara spoke. Not the words her father had sworn. She did not say I acknowledge the debt of my blood. She said something older, something she had found in the oldest margins of the journal, written in a hand that was not her father's. She said, I acknowledge the debt of my blood, and I name you, Bashan of the 7th house, who was betrayed and bound, who forgot your own name. The shade screamed. It was not a sound, it was a pressure, a crack in the fabric of the air itself, a wrongness that drove Elara to her knees and turned the black candles to ordinary flame. The darkness above the ritual stone churned and writhed, and in its center she saw something, a face, contorted, ancient, more frightened than angry. And Elara spoke the 3rd verse, the one her father had underlined 3 times in ink that shook as he wrote it. By blood I release you. By blood I reclaim what was taken. Be nothing. The shade tore itself apart, not violently, slowly, like a knot worked loose by patient fingers. Piece by piece, the darkness came undone, until there was nothing left but cold air and the faint smell of something that had once been alive. And then, silence. The crypt was just a crypt, the stone was just a stone, and falling from the air, landing on the ritual surface with a sound like a dropped key, was a small iron ring, black with age. The vault was not what she expected. She had imagined gold, treasures, the wealth her father had received from the shade, but there was no gold, only documents. Dozens of them, bound in the same raw leather as the book and the journal, each one written in the same dark ink, not one shade. She understood now, but many. Dozens of shades, bound into a single chain, each one carrying a different family's debt. The Vashan she had destroyed was not a singular entity. It was a collection. A library of broken souls, chained together by an original betrayal so old that no one remembered who had committed it or why. Elara read every name. She wrote them down. She sealed the vault again with the iron lock and put the ring around her neck, where it hung cold against her heart. She did not yet know what she would do. She was 19 years old, the heir to a house rebuilt on borrowed shadow, and she had just destroyed something that had been ancient before her great-grandfather was born. She had no plan, she had no army, she had only the names, but she had time. And she had her father's journal, and she had the cold. The cold was gone now, the pulling in her chest, the sense of something waiting. She felt, for the first time in her life, genuinely alone in her own skin. It was not a comfortable feeling, but it was honest, and Elara Vane had always preferred the truth. The house of Vane would endure. That was the first thing Elara understood. The debt was paid. The chain was broken, and what her father had built would stand. Her children would not inherit a shadow's claim. Their lives would be their own. But she thought of the others, the names she had read in the vault, the families who did not know, the children who would grow up feeling the cold pull, who would descend into their own crypts on their own 19th birthdays and find shade waiting with an offer they could not refuse. She would find them. She did not know how yet, but she had the iron ring, and she had the journal, and she had the knowledge of what it meant to name something that had forgotten its own name. She would find them, and she would free them, as she had freed herself, because some debts are not owed, some chains were never valid, and some shades only have power because we forget they were ever anything else. Asterisk, this has been the Crimson Pact, a Shadowforge Tales original. Asterisk.